On Thursday the 28th of December, just last month, a 28-year-old rapper from Oregon named Tykerrious Ray was last seen driving his pickup truck through the town of Roseburg when he would mysteriously disappear. 2 days later, his white Dodge Durango was found abandoned on the side of a highway just outside of town and was swiftly towed away by the police. However, after inspecting the vehicle, a cell phone was then discovered on the passenger seat that belonged to Tykerrious. So unfortunately, they were unable to get in touch with the young man and instead held on to the evidence. A week then went by with Tykerrious still failing to inquire about his truck, but given his troubled history with the law, it was initially assumed by the police that he was purposely choosing not to get in touch. However, in an instant, everything would suddenly change when the Roseburg Police Department received a phone call from his family claiming that they hadn't heard from or seen the 28-year-old in 10 days and that they were rightfully concerned for his safety. So, given these details, an official missing person report was then filed, and his image was plastered across the news and social media in the hopes that somebody would recognize his face. But unfortunately, after 3 weeks of searching, it would seem that Tykerrious Ray is still nowhere to be found, which has understandably led many to wonder, could he have been the victim of a random serial killer? Or could the guilty suspect be a little closer to home? Tykerrious Ray, otherwise known as Ty, was born on the 5th of March in 1995 in the small town of Opelika in Alabama. Not too much has been confirmed about his upbringing, but from what I was able to gather, he attended Opelika High School, where he would go on to graduate in the year of 2013. He then spent most of his free time with friends whilst working on his true passion, which was music. Ty always had a keen interest in rap and hip-hop from a very young age, but as he moved into his 20s, it seemed he was finally starting to turn this dream into a reality, as he would begin to release songs onto a SoundCloud profile in 2016 under the pseudonym Astro Slim. But despite this newfound outlet for Ty, it unfortunately wasn't enough to keep him out of trouble, as the now 26-year-old would eventually find himself in jail for committing an unknown crime. But to make matters worse, after getting out on bail, he would later decide to skip his court-appointed trial date, which would result in the young man being officially charged for an alias writ of arrest. He was then booked into jail once again and served an undisclosed amount of time in prison before eventually being released after serving the sentence. Now, although we don't know how long he was sentenced for, it can't have been a very large one, as by 2022 he was already free to roam the streets once again and pick up his music career where he had left off. But on top of this, he also vowed to start making positive changes in his life, and so at the age of 27, he would make the incredibly bold decision to move across the country to the state of Oregon, where he would eventually settle in another small town called Roseburg. Now keep in mind, Ty had been living in Opelika, Alabama for his whole life up until then, meaning that all of his friends and family lived on the East Coast. So I cannot express just how big a leap this would have been for the young man, and therefore, no matter what, you have to give him praise for taking such an important step to distance himself from his bad influences. But the positive changes didn't stop there, as the young man would immediately enroll himself at the local Umpqua Community College, where he would later graduate towards the end of 2022 with aspirations of becoming a functioning member of society once again. Just a quick side note, if you're from the state of Oregon, then you may recognize Umpqua Community College from the horrific mass shooting that took place back in 2015, which unfortunately took the lives of 9 people, including 1 college professor and 8 students. In fact, when researching this video, I personally came across the story for the first time, and I have to say, the details are truly troubling to say the least. But if you would like me to make a video detailing the lives of the victims, I wouldn't mind putting something together that honours their memories. So if this is something that you would be interested in seeing on this channel, please let me know in the comments. But anyway, getting back to the case at hand, everything seemed to be going well for Ty, with the aspiring rapper continuing to practice his passion, releasing lots of new music to his SoundCloud account. and by beginning to take his first steps into the world of social media influencing with his Facebook videos where he would discuss his opinions and have interesting takes on certain topics. However, all of this positive momentum that Ty had been carefully cultivating for the past year would suddenly seem to take a dark turn when he would start displaying some extremely strange behaviour in the months leading up to Christmas, where he would release a Facebook video speaking about not being afraid of some threats that he had been receiving. At first, it seemed that this was just his attempt at blowing off some steam to his followers, but this mild concern would soon turn into full-blown dread when the young man would suddenly disappear on that fateful day in December. On Thursday the 28th of December, the 28-year-old man was driving south through the streets of Roseburg when he would suddenly decide to turn onto a nearby highway. He then proceeded to speed down the road until he reached the Shady Oaks Hotel, where he would strangely choose to park up his truck on the side of the road and then exit the vehicle. From here, we can only speculate on what happened next, but given the details of the case, it would be safe to assume that Ty then decided to walk off in one particular direction, leaving his cell phone inside the truck. However, hours would eventually go by with the vehicle remaining in the same spot until almost 48 hours later when a highway patrol officer finally noticed it and reported the incident, before having the truck towed back to the Roseburg police station for examination. The police then started conducting their investigation on the vehicle and soon found that it belonged to Tykerrious Ray and that he was supposed to be on probation for a crime he committed 2 years prior. It is unknown what he did exactly, however we do know that he was scheduled to attend weekly meetings with his probation officer. So when the investigators noticed that he had missed his previous appointment, this understandably rung alarm bells throughout the police department. At first, most officers simply assumed he was afraid to pick up his truck, given his recent absence at the probationary meeting, but to their shock, everything would soon change when they would receive that harrowing call 2 weeks later. On Sunday the 7th of January, a phone call was made to the Roseburg Police Department from a concerned family who were desperately in search of answers. They quickly explained that one of their beloved family members named Tykerrious Ray had been missing for the past 10 days, and nobody had heard from him since the 28th of December. According to them, he hadn't shown up to any New Year's celebrations or even wished anybody a Happy New Year, which was the first clue that something was wrong. But when the 28-year-old continued his prolonged silence well into the new year, this mild worry they possessed soon escalated to a panic. Most of the Ray family lived in the state of Alabama, over 2,000 miles away, so it was deeply concerning that they couldn't check up on him, and therefore asked the police to conduct a welfare check. However, the police immediately recognized the name Tykerrious, and one of the officers checked the database to see if the name was a match. And this is when they realized for the first time that the owner of the abandoned truck was actually a missing person. So upon collection of this information, the police then put together a missing person report for the family and vowed to do everything they could to find the vulnerable young man. They then decided to start their search at the precise location where Ty's truck was found to speak to local residents about what they may have seen. Nearby to the location was a small motel called Shady Oaks, and so they collectively thought this was as good a place as any to start the investigation. However, it is unknown who they spoke to inside the motel, and it would seem nothing would come of this given the lack of leads. But across the street there was also a car garage that specialised in large vehicles, just like the one that belonged to Tykerrious. So this was the next location on the list. They quickly entered and spoke to the staff to see if they had seen the young man or possibly conducted business with him in the past few weeks, but once again, it would seem that no evidence would come of this, leaving the police extremely frustrated and still without any concrete leads to work with. So, with heavy hearts, the officers packed up their efforts and headed back to the drawing board. On Monday the 8th of January, the Roseburg Police Department left the station fresh-faced and ready to continue the investigation. They then headed straight back over to the location where his truck was last seen and sent teams of officers out to the surrounding areas in the hopes of finding some valuable evidence that may lead to where Tykerrious could have gone. But at first, it would appear that there was nothing to find. The investigators then continued walking and were eventually brought to the South Umpqua River, where they immediately thought the worst. But once again, upon further examination of the waterway, no evidence of Ty was discovered. The consensus at this point was that he must have continued walking, but there were no distinct signs of which direction he could have gone in, so it was almost impossible to decipher where to check next. The police were simply left scratching their heads as nobody had seen him and there was absolutely no evidence revealing where he could have gone. Security footage in the surrounding area was useless and no locals would admit to speaking with him. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. But determined to get to the bottom of the case, the Roseburg Police Department increased their media efforts to spread Ty's image further, sharing the case details with local police departments and asking local businesses to keep an eye out for him. The family of Tykerrious also started to get more involved, asking contacts they had in Oregon to print off posters displaying the missing person report, and to place them around the town of Roseburg, in the hopes this would spur on some confirmed sightings. However, just as before, the efforts of everybody involved would continue to remain fruitless, with no official sightings of Tykerrious being brought forward to this day. Now, unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. But with the police working alongside the local communities, they are continuing to spread the image of Tykerrious all over the state of Oregon, so we can only hope that it won't be too much longer until he is eventually discovered. However, given that the young man has now been missing for almost 1 month, with absolutely no sightings to speak of, his safe return is beginning to appear more and more unlikely as the days pass. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, as always, I would prefer to kick off this portion of the video by talking about the ways in which I believe Tykerrious could still be alive out there somewhere. And in fact, compared to other cases of a similar nature, I actually feel quietly confident that despite the long wait, Ty will be found alive eventually. After all, his friends and family mostly live out in Alabama, which is located on the other side of the country. So it's not like there are tons of people who know him and will be keeping an eye out, compared to if he had gone missing in his hometown. So in my personal opinion, the fact that he hasn't been found in over 4 weeks may just be because there aren't a lot of people actually looking for him. Also, although his image has been spread across the state of Oregon, I wouldn't say his missing person case has attracted too much attention. It was actually quite difficult to even find this case myself, let alone research the details. So once again, it wouldn't surprise me if he has been seen multiple times, but by people who didn't even realise he was a missing person. But if he is still out there somewhere, why has he failed to get in touch with any of his friends or family in such a long time? Well, one piece of evidence I was able to find during my research was that on the 22nd of November, just last year, he mentioned in a Facebook post that he was having to check in with his probation officer and was having to explain why he smelled of drugs. And keep in mind, this was only just over a month before he was last seen. So it's very possible that he may have done something that could have gone against the terms of his probation and would therefore send him back to jail. It would certainly explain why he would leave his cell phone, which would likely be able to track his whereabouts, and also why he never picked up his truck. Perhaps he was purposely leaving it behind in this location to throw off investigators, so they would assume he was a victim, and therefore he would be free to live under a new name and escape his probationary meetings and court-appointed curfews. But on the other hand, what if he isn't on the run from the law at all, but instead he is running from something much worse? Perhaps he got into some trouble with a local gang or drug cartel of some kind, and due to maybe owing them money, he has decided to go off-grid as he can't afford to pay them back and knows his life will be at risk. Now, to be honest, as dangerous as this theory may sound, perhaps this would be one of the better outcomes for the case, as although the situation wouldn't be ideal, at the very least, Ty would still be safe and alive somewhere. Also, given the fact that he had been improving his life in recent months ever since serving his crimes, I would hope that if he is ever found, he will not have to return to prison again. But if this is the case and Ty is not on the run from the police, then who exactly could he be running from? And how could he have even got wrapped up with these individuals in the first place? Well, one point to bring up is that he did mention in a Facebook video on the 15th of November that he apparently wasn't scared of something, but didn't reference what it was exactly he wasn't scared of. In my opinion, it sounds like he may be referencing a specific person or a potential group of people, but either way, we cannot be sure. However, if we were to read into this video a little further, it could certainly be possible that whoever it was that he wasn't scared of could have perhaps been someone that was threatening his life. After all, just over a month later after recording that video, he disappeared under extremely mysterious circumstances. Now, although it's definitely possible that the young man may have just gone into hiding to avoid being killed by this person, it's also plausible that he never even got the chance to hide, as it was already too late. Given the prevalence of Mexican drug cartels which operate along the west coast, it certainly wouldn't be surprising to me if Ty could have got himself involved with them. He was still relatively new to the town, so perhaps he was struggling with loneliness and was choosing to lean on drugs as his method of suppressing the symptoms. Moving forward with this theory, perhaps the cartel could have even killed him for being late on a payment or refusing to pay for these hard drugs. They then could have dumped his body in the South Umpqua River, which is located directly adjacent to where his car was found abandoned. Now, I will just say, I couldn't find any explicit evidence that Tykerrious was a hard drug user, but there is plenty of evidence from his Facebook page that he is a very big user of cannabis. So with this, along with his previous felonies, I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to at the very least hypothesize that he could have potentially been using some heavier drugs whilst out in Roseburg. But either way, any drug use can be potentially fatal if used enough, whether that be through an overdose or simply terrible decision making while on a particular substance. So with this in mind, could it be possible that Ty's disappearance wasn't related to gangs or cartels at all, but rather his strange disappearance was actually caused by none other than himself? Well, before I move deeper into this theory, I will just quickly say for the record that I'm aware there is no direct correlation between cannabis and overdoses, so I'm not saying Ty could have accidentally ended his life through excessive use of this legal drug. However, I think we can all agree that use of cannabis can lead to some incredibly dangerous situations, some of which have turned fatal in the past. So I do think it's possible that Ty's cannabis use could have been a potential cause of erratic behaviour that day. I will also say that from his Facebook videos, it did seem like he was smoking a lot of cannabis in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, likely more than usual. So it's possible that this caused him to have some kind of mental breakdown, or a moment of drug-induced paranoia whilst driving, that may have caused him to pull over and run away from his truck. I also won't rule out the possibility that he could have been using harder drugs at the time, that may have been too much for him to handle, again causing him to act irrationally, leaving his phone and truck behind and running away. Now, if this disappearance was caused by Ty himself, I cannot think of any other rational explanation as to why he would have left his truck abandoned somewhere. Well, all except for the idea that he purposely intended to hide away, of course. But staying on the mental breakdown theory for a moment longer, if he was just struggling with his life at the time, with a lot of pressure to improve and follow all of his probation rules, you could imagine that all of this, alongside being an ex-felon and an aspiring musician, could potentially have taken a toll on his mental health. Perhaps everything just became too much for Ty, resulting in a psychotic break, which would explain his strange decision-making on that day. But before I get too carried away here, I must clarify that this theory is merely an idea, and there has been no concrete proof to back it up, outside of the fact that he did like to use some drugs. So please take this information as you will. But if we rule out all other possibilities, including that Tykerrious is hiding from the law, he was a victim of a local gang, or he simply left due to a mental breakdown, what else could potentially explain the mysterious events of that day? Well, what if Tykerrious Ray was actually the victim of a random person, or maybe even a West Coast serial killer? On first thought, this might sound quite far-fetched, and I wouldn't disagree with you there. But to be transparent, there are currently a number of outstanding cold cases that have occurred over the past year, all along the West Coast, with very similar details to Ty's missing person case, so I wouldn't completely rule out this theory just yet. An example of one of these similar cases would be Jared Shadid, who was another young black man who had recently travelled over from the East Coast all alone, and was therefore more vulnerable than most. He was supposed to be staying at an Airbnb in Seattle, Washington, and was even captured on surveillance footage moving his belongings into the property. However, once he was finished, rather than entering the home, he mysteriously walked away, never to be seen again. His car was then found over 1,000 miles away in Los Angeles, abandoned and covered in parking tickets. But to this day, there have been no official sightings of Jared, so it is strongly believed by many that he was actually the victim of a possible serial killer who is acting out on the West Coast. It should be noted that Roseburg, Oregon is actually located along the way between Seattle and Los Angeles, so this area certainly would meet the geographical criteria of this potential killer's MO. Another similarity to highlight is that both of these men were travelling alone and were new to the area, so they would have been the perfect victim, as they would likely have no close contacts in the area. I cannot confirm this, but I think it would also be safe to assume that both men's vehicles would have had an East Coast number plate, so this could have been a potential marker that they were a good choice. Another point to add here is that both men were of a similar complexion, so perhaps they could have also been chosen as victims due to their skin colour. After all, it only takes one racist murderer to take the lives of multiple individuals over a long time span, so I wouldn't rule out the possibility that both Jared and Tykerrious could have been victims of hate crimes. But either way, until we have more evidence to work with, for now all we can really do is continue to speculate and raise awareness for these cases, and hope that in doing so the police will soon be able to get some answers and bring closure to the grieving families. Anyway, on that note, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any theories of your own that you think may help explain what really happened to Tykerrious Ray, please leave your comments down below and I will do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching and make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, if you would like to hear more about some of the other cases that I featured in this video, such as Jared Shadid, feel free to check out the playlist on screen now.